Hey guys, as you probably know, this semester we will use Mingle to help manage all the projects chosen by the senior project students. Mingle is an agile project management and collaboration application, and for this course we will use the cloud-based version of the app. Now, one of Mingle's greatest strengths is its level of customization. Mingle doesn't prescribe almost anything, and you can change it all you want to fit the way your team works. For instance, you can change the types of cards you use, the types of things you write in those cards, the hierarchical structure of those cards, the way you view the cards with these tabs up here, and many more things. However, all this flexibility can have a bit of a downside if you are new to the tool, and especially if you are new to the agile methodology. For this reason, Mingle includes several templates to help teams get started. But due to the very short time all teams in this class will have to produce a working solution, we have decided to create an even simpler template that everyone will be able to figure out by just watching this video and exploring on their own for a few minutes. This tutorial will only cover how to use this template in particular and connect it to the overall plan for the class. If you like Mingle and would like to use it for a future project, you can head over to their extensive support site and learn on your own so you can squeeze the most functionality out of it. They also have a pretty impressive tech support, so you can also shoot them an email if you get stuck. So let's begin by taking a look at the types of cards that we will be using. Over here, these are roughly sorted by relevance. First one is the sprint, that will be used for the sprints and for the backlogs. Then we have stories that will be used for regular user stories and also for defects. And then we have tasks. A task can be a user story task or a defect task. And then these last three are for bookkeeping of the different meetings that will be conducted over the semester. Next up are card properties. These are all the card properties that all the card types could have. These have been all properly assigned to the card types, so you don't have to worry about it. You have here all the things that you would expect to be able to write on a card, such as the date, the owner of the card, the number of points for the stories and tasks, the priority, and so on. Card trees determine how different card types are related to one another. For instance, this tree down here says that a task may be associated with story and a story may be associated with a sprint. From the other point of view, this says that a sprint is a collection of stories, which in turn is a collection of tasks. Card keywords are a nice productivity feature that you can use to find what you want quickly. This in here is a list of words that Mingle will recognize as a card reference. By default, every time you type card followed by a number or number sign followed by a number, Mingle will recognize that and create a link to that particular card. So, if in card number 10 you write, this is related to functionality described in card 1, people reading this card in the future will be able to click a link and go directly to card number 1. Finally, card transitions are a collection of actions that can be performed over a card to get it from one state to another. A very simple example of a transition would be to mark a task as done by setting its status property to done. Of course, this is useful when you perform much complicated actions that will benefit from this sort of automation. As you can see, this template doesn't have any transitions, and most likely you will not need this functionality, but you can read up on it and create some transition if you really want to. Now I'll go over the tabs one by one, and for each one try to answer the question of what's in that tab, who does what in the tab, and mention relevant information about the tab. The first one is the product backlog. In here you have stories and defects from the three backlogs. The three backlogs are the carryover backlog, which contains any pending user stories and defects from the previous release during the previous semester, if any. The defect backlog, which include defects found in previous sprints, and the product backlog, which contains the list of features pending implementation for this release. In this view, you have the two most important properties of a story, the point and the priority. Both of these properties are essential for the sprint planning, and your Agile tutorial explains how to make use of them. Let's now go over the point system we devised for the class. Point is a property of both stories and tasks, and as you can see here, you can assign 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 24, or 40 points to a story or a task. You will realize by looking at the 4-point amounts here that this corresponds to 1, 2, 3, and 5 days. You can try to match up points with number of hours if that will help, but this is not necessary. For the point system to work, the only thing that matters is that the assignments are proportional to each other, meaning that a 4-point task takes about double the effort to implement than a 2-point task. Going back to the fact that both stories and tasks share the points property, if you open up a story card, you will see that it has points and total task points. These points here are the total number of points estimated for the whole story. And this here is an automatic property that is created by adding up all the points assigned to all the tasks that are related to this particular user story. As to who does what here, the product owner creates stories and defects and assigns priorities to those stories and defects, and the team assigns points to stories and defects that will be later refined before it is selected for implementation in one sprint. In order to create a card, you will click the Add Card link and this window will pop up. You select Story in this drop-down menu and enter the title for the story, the description, and acceptance criteria. In terms of card properties, it is important that the product owner do not assign a status or the number of points. The number of points will be assigned by the team at some later point, and the status will be set to do once this story is selected for implementation in one sprint. At this point, the product owner can assign a priority to the story if it is already known, or it may be done later as well. A new card will be on the product backlog tree, simply because it is the most common backlog, but the product owner should change this to the defect backlog when entering a defect by selecting this drop down and clicking on the defect backlog, and then you should set here not set. Defects that are created as stories and put in the backlog are those related to stories that are not being worked on during this sprint. If someone notices something wrong with implementation of some of the stories in the current sprint, the right thing to do is just tell the team member that is working on it so that it may be corrected right away. And one last note is that stories and defects from the carryover backlog are only moved to the sprints for implementation. There is no need to move these to the product backlog and then to sprint. In the sprint planning grid, you'll see all the stories and defects of a project, either under one of the backlogs or one of the sprints. As you can see, the stories and defects here are color-coded by priority using this scale down here. At the beginning of each sprint, every 2 weeks during the sprint planning meeting, the team will come to this tab and select stories and defects to be implemented in the current sprint based on their number of points and priority. To view the number of points assigned to each story, you can either open it up by clicking on it, or you can select to color them by points. If you do this, the color scale here will be changed accordingly. As is typical in this type of grids, to assign a story to a sprint, you will simply drag the card to the appropriate column. And please remember to plan only one sprint at a time, the current sprint. The sprint board is where the team will plan in detail the work to be done in this sprint and keep track of the progress. In here, you will see all the tasks that make up the stories and defects chosen for this sprint. The team will need to carefully consider each story and defect and decompose it into small tasks before work can begin on those stories. Each task should have an assigned number of points and priority, and the total number of points assigned to the tasks that make up a story should match the number of points estimated for the story. This is for bookkeeping and having useful graphs. You should check this by opening up the story card and comparing the points estimated for the story with the total task points. Remember that the points on the story are only an estimate, and you should change it to match the more refined task points estimate if they don't match. Tasks in the sprint board I group by the corresponding story. If I go back to the sprint planning and then add another story to this sprint, when I come back here to the sprint board, you'll see that there is another row corresponding to the task for this story. As you see here, cards are grouped by the status in the column, and as work progresses, team members will drag card to the corresponding status. One story should be fully implemented by the collection of tasks into which it has been decomposed. So, if all tasks corresponding to a story reach certain status, the story itself should be updated to reflect this. For this, just open the story and select the appropriate status. Going back to the sprint board, you can find out what the numbers in parentheses mean in any grid by looking at the grid settings up here. In this case, the row aggregate is a sum of points, so these two here means that the points of all the cards in this row add up to 2. Similarly, the column aggregate is the count of cards in the column, 1 and 1 in this case. To create a card, a team member will either click the Add Card link or drag this little card here into the corresponding cell. After you enter the name and the description, you can come down here and specify a priority, an owner if it's already decided who's going to implement this task, and the number of points. As you can see, the story is already updated by the fact that you dropped the card into the correct cell. Finally, as you may have noticed already, you are seeing only some of the cards here, because on the right hand side here there is a filter that is showing only the cards that belong to sprint 1. At the beginning of each sprint, the Scrum Master should come here and update this view by selecting the appropriate sprint. That's all for the main tabs. Now let's take a look at the two tabs that will help the team conduct the meetings. The daily Scrum is supposed to be face-to-face, but an academic setting where every team has a different schedule makes this unlikely. However, conducting virtual meetings will help you learn the Scrum methodology and can still be very helpful. At the beginning of each working day, each team member will come to the daily Scrum board and create one card for this day. In this card, the member will answer the 3 basic daily Scrum questions and set the owner and date of the card. Cards will be automatically grouped by owner on the columns and by date on the rows. The Scrum Master and all team members should read all the cards and work with the Scrum Master to solve any impediments that come up. The team can use murmurs on the cards to discuss the details. Every time a team member enters a comment on a card and mentions the team, everyone will receive an email notification. The last board that we will look at is the retrospectives. In here, the team will keep a collection of retro-action cards with the ideas mentioned in all retrospective meetings. The cards of all meetings are together and color-coded by priority. The team will create new cards, move them around, and delete them as new issues are identified and others are resolved. The Scrum Master should take the lead in managing this board, but every team member is expected to contribute to it. As with the daily Scrum, everyone can use murmurs to discuss the progress of each card. Since teams will have only one retrospective meeting every 2 weeks that will probably coincide with the sprint review, it is likely that this one will in fact be face-to-face, but even then, it will be a good idea to use these cards to keep a record of what was discussed and make it easier for the Scrum Master to follow up on concerns. Although you already saw one of these in passing at the beginning of the video, I want to point out that there are 2 trees available as tabs in the template. One is a product backlog, and the other is sprints. They contain, as you would expect from their names, the backlogs and the sprints, with their children cards. These are really convenient ways of visualizing all the cards and moving them around if you need to. As a last word on using the template, I encourage you to reuse the existing cards by modifying them, and then continue on by adding new cards. This will ensure that you will not lose any of the configured tabs in the process. And that's it. I wish you all a very good semester and hope that you enjoyed the class and the Agile experience. Happy coding!